The Porsche Taycan was received with some healthy skepticism. Could an electric car feel like a real Porsche? Well, most journalists concluded that it was the most engaging electric car to drive. But does the market agree with this verdict? And is it sufficient to maintain strong residuals? Values for real Porsches soared and are close to record heights. Moreover, it are especially the purebred 911s that provide you with a raw driving experience that saw major price increases. So what does this mean for Taycan residuals? A car that's basically the opposite of those purebred 911 drivers cars. Since the Taycan is the first electric Porsche, we don't know yet exactly how the values will develop. On the one hand, it's tempting to think that values tank when you drive it out of the showroom. After all, one can argue that it misses the real Porsche DNA. Moreover, before used car prices went crazy, the depreciation rate on the Panamera was substantial, so why wouldn't the same apply to the Taycan? However, it's also not strange to think that Taycan residuals will be extremely strong and perhaps even higher than those of other Porsche models. With increasing petrol prices, electric car ownership might be increasingly attractive, hereby driving up demand for the Taycan and keeping residuals high. Moreover, legislators are encouraging electric vehicle ownership, something that might cause uncertainty among petrol car owners and in turn drive them towards electric vehicles. In this video we will make a first attempt to try and answer all of those questions. We will have a look at the value development for the Taycans and compare that development to the one of the Panamera and the famous 911. Yet, let's first have a look at the current market. Over here we have the US market with the model year on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. There are currently 10 different Taycan versions for sale, and it becomes a bit messy to identify them all in one graph. So I chose to split the graph by the base, S, GTS, Turbo and Turbo S models. And this is also the split we will focus on during the rest of the video. We can see that the market is relatively small as there are only 498 cars listed for sale. And out of these the S models are the most popular with 212 cars for sale. This is followed by the base and the two turbo models. The GTS is quite rare as there are only a few cars listed for sale. Now when we look at the prices, we can see that they start at $92,000 for a base model and go up to $250,000 for a top spec Turbo S. Also, you can see that the price gaps between the models are fairly stable, with exception of the gap between the Turbo S and the Turbo models. A 2020 Turbo S is for example $33,000 more expensive than a Turbo, while the difference between the base and the S model is around $20,000. And this of course matches with the MSRP difference. Now there are two things in particular that grabbed my attention here. There are hardly any model year 2021 or 2022 turbos for sale. On the well-known forums I found that the delivery times are extremely long for some Taycans, but I'm not sure if this really explains the lack of turbo models over here. If some of you have an explanation for this, please share it down below in the comment section. Now second, we can see that the price difference between the model years is minimal for the base and the S models, while it's relatively large for the Turbo S. For example, a 2022 Turbo S is around $20,000 more expensive than a 2021, while a 2022 S is only $3,000 more expensive than a 2021 one. And this already reveals a bit about the value development in the Taycan market. Let's investigate this. We are now up to date on the current market, and that means that it's time to have a look at the value development over time. Did values ride with the used car market trend, soar like we saw in the 911 market, or perhaps decreased? It's time to find out. However, before we do that I need to mention that the Taycan is still a relatively new car, so this means that we don't have too much data available. And this in turn means that we need to be careful with drawing conclusions. But with that administrative message out of the way, let's have a look at the data. Over here we have the price development between April 2021 and May 2022 for the used Taycans. And to keep things comparable over time, I excluded the Cross Turismos and the Sport Turismos. Now when we look at these trends, we can see that all cars went up in value. So in that respect the development is quite similar to the overall car market. However, we can see big differences between the models. The price increase in the turbo segment is relatively small. The Turbo S increased by 2.9% and the normal turbo by 2.6%. And these increases fall short to the ones that we can see in the base and the S market. In the S segment, prices increased by 11.2% and by 7.2% in the base segment. Yet, there were only 11 base models for sale in October, so we need to be a bit careful with interpreting this increase. Having said that, all the increases between April 2021 and now are statistically confirmed. So this means that they are unlikely to be the result of chance. and therefore it's fair to conclude that basically all Taycans went up in value. Now that might not come as a surprise. However, the median mileage increase in the Taycan market is quite large compared to the sports cars that I typically analyze on this channel, and that makes the price increase even more special. Let me show you what I mean. Over here we have the market characteristics for the used Taycans, with the supply, median mileage and median model year development. If we look at the middle graph, we can see that a used Taycan S had around 2.2 thousand miles in April of last year. Now, however, they tend to have a mileage of 8.5 thousand miles. So think about that. You pay roughly 11% more for a car that has a mileage that's 6.3 thousand miles higher. So that's a pretty strong result. Yet, it might be a bit strange if you look at the supply graph. We can see that supply increased a lot for the S models. In April 2021 there were 45 used cars for sale and now there are 181 cars for sale. That's quite a big increase, but apparently not enough to satisfy demand. No, to see the reason for the price increase we need to have a look at the supply development for the new cars. Look at that, there are hardly any new cars for sale. We can see that supply levels dropped in the full market and also that they are way below what you would typically expect. And this of course results from supply chain issues that are partially driven by the situations in Ukraine. Porsche reported a few times that production was halted. And that's very unfortunate if you are waiting for your new Taycan, but relatively good news if you already got one and you got it at MSRP. As you just saw, it's likely that you could get in and out of it with no loss. So, to sum it up, Taycan values increased, but there are some differences between the models. The more expensive models like the turbo one saw the smallest price increase and the cheaper models saw the largest increase. Both increases seem to result from the scarcity in the market, as the number of new cars for sale decreased drastically since its introduction. If you want to drive a Taycan right now, you might end up being forced to go for a used one. Now before we continue, I would like to mention that in next week's video I will cover the McLaren market, and that I will include again a section in which I will answer your questions. So please let me know in the comment section what you would like to know about McLaren values. But now back to the Taycan. You see, to really say something about the value development over time and to answer the question that we asked ourselves in the beginning of the video, we of course need to compare the value development to other cars. But before we do that, I would like to spend a moment on the differences in the value development between the cheaper and the more expensive models. There's a good chance that this is driven by the differences in the mileage sensitivity. Let me show you. Over here we have the mileage to price relationship for the different models, including the depreciation per 1000 miles. Now naturally, you could expect the turbo models to lose more per 1000 miles driven than the cheaper base models. The turbo loses $1.5 and $2,000 per 1000 miles, whereas this is only $590 and $470 for the S and the base models. No surprises over here. However, also in relative terms, the loss is much higher in the turbo markets. It's 1% for both models versus 0.4% for the cheaper models. Hence, the price sensitivity to a mileage increase is much higher in the turbo segments, hereby explaining the lower price increase. Yet, a rate of 1% is not uncommon for brand new cars. It is the low rate of 0.4% for the cheaper models that's really unique. Normally, you only find these rates for cars that are a few years old. But now then, it's time to compare the value development over time to the one of the Panamera and the 911. Is the price increase similar to the one of the Panamera, and can we therefore expect high depreciation rates if the situation goes back to normal? Or does it actually look more like the 911 value development? This in turn would mean a more stable value development when things normalize. Let's have a look, but before we do so, if you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. We'll compare the value development for the S, Turbo and Turbo S models. After all, we saw that it's a bit difficult to trust the trend for the base Taycan. Over here we have the comparison for the S models. Yet, before we look at the prices, I need to share some administrative message to you. The Taycan market selection is the same as what we saw before, while the 911 market consists out of the 911, 992 Carrera S's. The Panamera market consists out of the latest generation, so the 971, and only the hatchback version is included. I figured this was fair since the Turismo models are also excluded from the Taycan market. Alright, are you still with me here? Unfortunately, we don't have the exact same data points, so we need to do some estimating here. As we just saw, the price increase in the Taycan market was 11.2% between April 21 and now. The Panamera saw a slightly lower increase in a period that's 2 months longer. Between February 2021 and now, values went up by 9.2%. For the 911 we don't have a data point that's close to April, but if we estimate it by using the interpolation, we end up with an increase of 10.4%. So based on these results, the Panamera clearly increased the least, as also the time period was 2 months longer. This is followed by the 911 and finally by the Taycan that saw the largest increase. However, we need to be realistic here. The values are all extremely close, so we can't put too much emphasis on the ranking here. Yet, we can say that the Taycan follows the market behavior in this segment. But what about the turbo market? Let's have a look. The Taycan went up by 2.6%, and this is a lot less than the 9.8% that we can see in the Panamera market. A big contributor to this is the value decline in the Taycan market during the last 5 months. With 10.1%, also the 911 Turbo increased by a lot more than the Taycan. Moreover, the increase only covers the period between March of this year and March of last year, so it's slightly shorter than the Taycan's period. As you can see, the difference between the Taycan and the other cars is quite large in the Turbo segment. Let's have a look at the Turbo S market now, to see if the same applies over there. We can see first of all that the 911 Turbo, again, increased the most. Prices went up by 10.7%. Yet, when we look at the Taycan and the Panamera market, we can see that the Panameras came down by 9.2% while the Taycans went up by 2.9%. That's a bit strange, right? Why did the Panameras come down so much in price? Well, the underlying market composition changed quite a lot during last year. The cars that are for sale today have a higher mileage and are older. Combine this with a small market of only 20 cars and this trend becomes difficult to trust. So after these 3 graphs with mixed results, you might wonder, what on earth can we conclude from this? Good question. Over here we have all the price changes we talked about. The first thing that you can see is that the 911 market is the most consistent. It increased by 10 to 11% for all model types. And when you look at data like this, that's what you want to see. It makes it easy to trust the numbers. Second, when it comes to the Taycan, results are a bit mixed. We can see that results for the S model are in line with the Panamera and the 911. Yet, the increase for the Turbo S is far below the one of the 911. Moreover, the increase for the normal Turbo is significantly below the one of the 911 and the Panamera. And with that, it's time to wrap up and conclude. We started the video with the question how Taycan values will develop. Are they going to tank as it's not a real Porsche, or are they actually quite strong as there is a strong push towards electric cars? Based on the data that we analyzed, we can rule out that Taycan values are tanking. Values increased for all models, and this seems to result at least partially from the scarcity in the market. There are hardly any new Taycans for sale. But can we say that values are strong? Well, partially. We saw that Taycan S values increased in line with the Panamera S and the 911 market. That's not a bad thing, but it also shows that Taycan residuals are not exceptionally strong. They just followed the market trend. However, when we look at the turbo market, we can see that the value increase falls short of the Panamera and the 911. We saw somewhere in the middle section of the video that this might result from the high depreciation per 1000 miles driven for the turbos. And this also means that we can't say that values for the turbos are strong. Now before we wrap up, I need to highlight again that all of this is of course based on limited data, and therefore we need to be careful with interpreting these conclusions. Hence, I think it's fair to say that they are tentative conclusions. We need more data to confirm these developments. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing cars, but would have liked to see the video for a different car, let me know the name of the car for which you would like to see an analysis by commenting it down below in the comment section. Also don't forget that you can find many market analysis on my channel. The videos are organized by brand, so you can easily see if the car you're interested in is already covered. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.